All right, it is high noon on the East Coast, and we are exactly 3 weeks away, 21 days from the big day, from Election Day 2018. And this is another episode of 218. What is 218 if you've been watching this? Surely you know 218 is the magic number. If the Democrats get that, they take back the House. If the Republicans get at least 218, they hang on to the House. When I'm standing at this board on election night, 3 weeks from tonight, we're going to be talking a lot about 218, the magic number in the House. A bunch of other numbers we're also going to be talking about. But here we are, 3 weeks and counting. We've been doing this for a while now. We always begin the show by taking the temperature. Where does the race stand right now? Starting with the big picture. And the big picture, I have to say, 3 weeks out, it's a little muddled. It's a little confusing. I'm not sure what to make of it. Fortunately, we got a panel today that might be able to help with that. But let me show you the numbers that we have. Let's see if you can make some sense of this. So first of all right, here's the headline. This is one of the numbers we've seen in the last few days. This seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? This is what they call the generic ballot. Which party would you like to see control Congress at the end of this year after this election? The Democrats winning this 53-42, an 11-point margin. Remember talking this year about, hey, the Democrats, they need to win that generic ballot by, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 points, something around there. That's been the number we've been talking about. Here they are in double digits on this one. We've seen a couple polls where they're in double digits. This is the national generic ballot. So you look at this and you say, well, that's great news for Democrats. That must be it, right? Well, when I said it's muddled, when I said it's confusing, take a look inside these numbers. This is the national generic ballot, but then this is ABC and Washington Post. They took this poll. They went and they said, well, let's just look at the battleground districts. Let's just look at the districts where we think control of the House will actually be decided, those 218 seats, to get to the magic number there. See if I get this right. And here, you see a very different picture. Look at this, 47, 46, almost even, slight advantage there for the Republicans. This is in 66 competitive districts. Remember, the vast majority of those 435 seats that are up this year aren't competitive. We already know pretty much, barring an act of God, who's going to win those seats. So this is where the action really is, and you get a very different picture here. So that makes things a little bit more confusing. And then there is this. Check this out. Here is Donald Trump's job approval rating right now. What you have here is the average of all the approval rating polls that are out there. He's sitting at 43.5%. If you take that by most historical standards, that's not a great place for a president to be heading into a midterm election. Bill Clinton was around there in 1994. They called that the Republican Revolution. Ronald Reagan was there in 1982. He didn't do too well. Not a great place to be. However, a couple things to keep in mind with this. Number one is this. That's actually up. He's basically up 3 points this month, in the month of October. In the average of polls, Donald Trump's approval rating has climbed 3 points. That's not a huge number, but that's real. That's significant. He has improved his political standing at least into the middle of October. The other thing to keep in mind, if we go back and take another look, see if I can get this right. If we go back and take another look, 43.5%, we're in such a polarized country right now. Republicans control the House. They have a little bit of an incumbency advantage. So many of these lines right now, you talk about gerrymandering, you talk about sorting, all of these things. The bottom line is Republicans think if Trump can get to the mid-40s, 44, 45, they love 46, 47%. I don't know if they'll get there, but they think if Trump can be sitting at the mid-40s in his approval rating, they think they have a fighting chance to hang on to the House. The lower it gets, obviously, the better Democrats feel. And so if it's up 3 points and sitting at 43.5, it's starting to creep into that zone Republicans kind of want to be at. Is it quite there? Doesn't look that way, but it's not as far off as it was a couple weeks ago. So that's what I mean when I say we are getting some sort of conflicting signals, just in terms of, by the way, this board, brand new here. They've been working on this for a while. I'm kind of debuting it today, so you're seeing we're going to be playing with this on election night. This is all going to be filling in. We'll give you a little peek right now. This is what we think the battleground looks like. We just showed you that poll. These are the districts where we think, Democrats, broadly speaking, have some kind of a hope, some kind of a chance. Remember, their magic number's 23. But I think you got to narrow it, at least to begin this discussion, to a more particular type of district right here. Here they are. We're going to be talking an awful lot about these. These are the Clinton 1 Republican-held districts. So you can see there are 20, see if I can write here, actually. There are 25 of these. 25 of these are Republican House districts. Republicans currently represent them. Each one of these districts was won by Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump in 2016. So this is sort of the first line of attack for Democrats. One of the possibilities when when you start to look at these sort of conflicting numbers we're talking about here, is that there are almost two divergent stories happening here when it comes to the House. One is in districts that are like these. These tend to be like right here. This is the 10th District of Virginia. This is the D.C. suburbs. Barbara Comstock, the Republican, represents it. She's been trailing in every poll we've seen out there. You got a bunch, you know, sort of right around here in the Philadelphia area. There's a couple in New Jersey as well, Southern California. How about the Twin Cities? How about Kansas City? How about Chicago? How about Denver? Very, very, you know, a lot of common characteristics here. Suburban, traditionally Republican, but they don't seem to like Trump. This is where it may be right now there's just enormous Democratic energy, maybe even more Democratic energy as a result of the whole Kavanaugh drama of the last couple weeks. So maybe the Democratic prospects have improved here in these suburban metropolitan districts. But the question is, will it extend any further than that? When you see a generic poll with Democrats up 11, is it because they're just doing so great in places like this and then in their base? Question is, would it expand much further than that? And so that's going to be one of the questions. If I see if I can get this, well, I can't quite get it. We're going to have plenty of time on this. Plenty of time today, plenty of time the next few weeks. But I think that's the basic question here. So I've talked enough. I'm going to take a walk back over to the panel right now. I'm going to see what they have to say. Joining me right now, we've got three exciting guests for today. Washington Bureau Chief for Vice News, Shawna Thomas. Staff writer with the National Review, Alexandra DeSanctis, and Democratic strategist Aisha Moody Mills. Thank you all for being here. And, well, Shawna, let me start with you. I guess it's one of those, if you told me I had to pick right now, guess what's going to happen, I'd guess the Democrats are going to take the House. But when I start to go through district by district on there, I do get the sense this is closer than it was a couple weeks ago. I
think it's definitely closer. We were in the Vice News offices in D.C. We were talking to certain people in the Republican Party yesterday, and they, by no means were they projecting full-on strength. We're going to keep the House of Representatives. But they also didn't seem as worried as I thought they would be going into this meeting to sort of do a background meeting about what's going on in the states. I think the momentum and the thing you're not mentioning in the polling is the money seems to be behind Democrats. And I think Republicans have conceded that the Democrats have done some kind of crazy job raising money this time. So if they can get their message out there and then get people to actually come to the polls, I still think it looks like a Democratic House. But I'm not going to say that definitively because I don't want anyone to hold that against me at some point.
Well, I'm curious, right? We were all haunted by 2016, too, and probably a million other botched calls and elections that we've all made in our lifetimes. But when you say Republicans weren't as worried, you know, talking to them as you thought, what, did they? Can you isolate what it is that's giving them this? I don't know if optimism is the word, but less pessimism.
I think there were just specific races that people thought were very much so in the bag for Democrats that they're like, it's not. And I think in Florida, where Donna Shalala's race is, that's something that they pointed to specifically. They have a candidate. It's Ileana Ros-Lehtinen district, Republican, long-term Congresswoman. In the Republican candidate, there is a Hispanic woman who is from the area, who's been known around that district for a long time, actually speaks Spanish. I think the original thought was with Republicans and Donna Shalala, she'll have money, she has the Clinton name, that kind of thing behind her. But what they found was they found the actual right candidate. And there's a couple of places where they're like, we're not saying we're going to keep the House, but we have chosen some right candidates in some places that the Democrats haven't countered very well. So what I mean is they didn't seem to be doomsday at that point. They just were like, we have to put the money into the races we think we can win. Yeah, there is a poll going on. The New York Times is doing this live polling online. They're in that Shalala race down there. So very interesting to see in a couple of days how that shakes out. Well, so Aisha, let me ask you. I mean, if Republicans are feeling less pessimistic, are Democrats looking around and feeling more pessimistic? Are they haunted by 16 at all, wondering the pieces seem to be in place, but maybe we're missing something here?
Haunted isn't the word that I would use. Really riled up and motivated is the word that I would use. So what the polls don't show is they don't show enthusiasm, right? They show attitude, but they don't show enthusiasm. And so while the numbers may look close, what's interesting about those battleground districts that you just put up is that we're seeing huge momentum among women and women shifting. Former Trump supporters who are women now saying that they're going to support the Democrat in that district, and that's huge. And not only are we seeing women overwhelmingly go for Democrats, given the misogynistic environment that the Republicans have created and are boasting about, that's going to be huge with motivation to come out and vote. But we're also seeing women show up in real ways around volunteerism. So since the Kavanaugh, I was about to call it the Kavanaugh trial, since the Kavanaugh hearings, we've actually seen women showing up at campaigns saying, I want to do something, and being more active and engaged. And so that enthusiasm gap, frankly, which I think that there is, what I'm hearing about and experiencing is that the Republicans are like, yeah, fine, we like Trump and we've liked Trump. And, you know, it's not surprising that his approval rating, you know, is directly correlated with the number of people out there who say they want to vote for a Republican for the House, right? But they're not particularly riled up or enthusiastic. The Democrats are on fire. Since the Women's March, since the inauguration, the Democrats have said, we are taking back the House. We are fighting for our right to our livelihood. This is personal. This is literally, the politics are personal to us. And so that is why the Democrats are going to take back the House.
Well, I've seen that energy, and I think that's certainly been the case in my view, Alexander. My reading of this for the last year and a half has been that there has been a pretty big energy imbalance. Now, where I've really seen it in particular the last year and a half is you'll have these random special elections, sometimes for Congress, sometimes for state legislative seats where traditionally nobody turns out, and you're suddenly seeing Democrats flood the polls and Republicans not doing that. But it feels to me that in the last 10 days or so, that Republican energy, at least in these polls, has gone up. I wonder what you would attribute that to, and if you think that's something that can actually last for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I did think for sure the Democrats did have the enthusiasm gap, and I think they still do. But to me, I think the Kavanaugh confirmation fight has definitely narrowed that gap a little bit, and I definitely wouldn't say Republicans have more enthusiasm than Democrats at this point. And looking at, you know, historically in the midterms, that's to be expected when you have a Republican incumbent with Trump's approval rating where it is. That makes sense. But I think a lot of Republicans who maybe like Trump and are happy with the way things are, who weren't going to show up at the polls, are now thinking, you know what, if this is about, you know, they're upset about what happened to Kavanaugh, they believed him, and they think if this is how the other side's going to play, I better show up and make sure my guy gets in office. And I think that probably will play out a little bit more in the Senate races and have more of an effect there.
But does that, I mean, we see how fast events move on. And Kavanaugh, even now, it doesn't quite feel as urgent as it did a couple days ago. Is that going to be on voters' minds come November? Or are they?
I think it'll depend on if Republican candidates are good at keeping it on people's minds, honestly. And I think it really did upset people, and it's hard for things like that to stick around a long time with the way news cycles move around here. But I think if a candidate, Republican candidates, kind of harp on that, it might work in some districts.
Or it could backfire, because we're talking specifically about white men. Like, this is really about white men who are excited and riled up around the Kavanaugh hearings because they're feeling attacked, and they're the minority. So I think that ultimately the elections are going to be about how white women are feeling. And what is encouraging for Democrats is that we're seeing, we knew that, you know, 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump in the presidential, but now in these battleground districts, we're seeing those women start to peel over and say, I'm now voting Democrat, and I don't like what happened to Dr. Ford, and I don't like the way that these guys are poking out their chests and treating women. And we can't get over the misogyny here and the role that the power of the woman is going to play, especially white women. And I think that's what those districts are going to come down to.
Well, and I think we've seen anecdotal evidence because we've been following candidate Katie Hill around in California's 25th district, which is one of those red to blue districts that the DCCC is trying to harp on. And they've told us that they have had volunteers come in since the Kavanaugh hearings and literally volunteer to go out and door knock for Katie. So there is somewhat of a surge there. But on the other side, I was in West Virginia 2 weeks ago, and we did a focus group right after Joe Manchin announced that he would vote and support Kavanaugh. And there were multiple women in that focus group who said, multiple white women in that focus group who said, I support what Joe Manchin did there. They weren't necessarily Democrats, they were Republicans, but they were like, there was one woman who said, I've been sexually assaulted before, I still think this is unfair to Kavanaugh, I wouldn't want this to happen to my son, or that messaging has permeated a little bit.
And I wonder, too, when we put Trump's approval rating up there, going up, 3 points is not nothing when it comes to his presidency. I mean, we're in a sort of a different standard here where, you don't have, George W. Bush went from 95% after 9/11 down to 30 at his lowest, a 65-point range. I think with Trump, the range is maybe 9 points over the last year and a half or so. So 3 points, I think, is significant. I guess the question is, what would you attribute that to? I mean, one theory that's out there is, by his standards, he's been a little bit more subdued as all of this has played out. Do you think that's played a role here?
I think that's a huge part of it. And if you look at where he was coming into his presidency, I'm pretty sure he was almost exactly where he is right now in approval rating. So he's hardly gone up and down at all. And I think, so for him, maybe we should be celebrating. But I think part of it is the Kavanaugh fight. He really did, for the most part, kind of keep his mouth shut. And we've noticed in the past times where he's more quiet and he's not, speaking off the cuff about things, his approval rating goes up a little bit. And I think we had the NAFTA deal that seems to have been a success. We have, the economy's doing well, and people are, by and large, people who did support him in 2016 are generally happy with the status quo, I think.
Well, but I mean, he kept his mouth shut until he didn't in Mississippi, and really, basically, channeled all this anger that was out there, primarily because of white men, and may have been part of the reason Kavanaugh was pushed over the edge, to be truthful. And I also think with President Trump, unlike I feel previous presidents when it comes to election cycles, midterm election cycles, they don't necessarily want to make it about them, but usually the other side does make it about them, and that's fine. President Trump is just fine making this election about him if he thinks it's going to rile up the base, and that's why, I mean, he's in Arizona later this week. They announced the Texas rally. That's why he's out there, because the base responds, and they were worried that the base was not going to show up and vote in this particular midterm election.
Which I think is going to be good for the Democrats because it also riles up the Democratic base, right? It really is the battle of the bases.
What would it look like? Because I think this is now, at this point, 3 weeks out, this seems very, very possible to me. We will see, if events change over the next 3 weeks and we're in a different place on Election Day. But it seems possible to me right now that we're looking at a split on Election night. And you're looking at Republican gains in the Senate. Maybe they pick up a North Dakota, a Missouri. We're seeing polling that says maybe they'll hang on in Nevada. Maybe they even hang on in Arizona. I know the candidate there is having some trouble right now. So if the Republicans post gains in the Senate, and the Democrats win the House, and it's not, we're not talking a 50-seat tsunami here, but we're talking Democrats win the House by, say, a 10-seat margin. That's a big shift in the House, but it's also, when's the last time one party won the House and the other gained in the Senate? Would Democrats consider that a successful outcome?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, taking back the House is huge. And I think that what it does is it now creates a landscape where the Democrats can have real conversations about Donald Trump and do some investigating and get to the bottom of who he is, what nefarious dealings he's had, really be able to, investigate all the people around him. And that is going to be big going into 2020 when there's another Senate map. So I think that it's huge for the Democrats to take the House. There's a lot that they can do. There's a lot that they could actually get done, but there's also a lot of a spotlight that they can shine on the current administration of Republicans that really tee up the 2020 battle.
And let's also remember, the Senate map was never favorable for Democrats. And they said it at the beginning, they say it now. These are almost all states Trump won that are represented by a Democratic senator. So this idea of the Democrats taking the Senate, and I know there's a lot of energy behind them, was only kind of a real thing. If they lose the Senate again, I don't think anybody will be surprised by that.
I wonder, too, though, I know Trump obviously wants to keep the House. He wants the win and what that would look like. If the Democrats do get the House and they do begin launching the kinds of investigations Aisha's talking about here, is that something from a Republican standpoint, from Trump's standpoint, I should say, does that help him rally the base in a way? Does that give him something to push back against?
I think so, and I think, no question it would be a huge loss for Trump if Republicans lose the House. But I do think his loyal base is going to believe whatever he says about whether it be the Russia investigation or collusion down the list, his taxes. There's a certain core of the right that's going to believe President Trump no matter what, and he knows that, and I think he knows that his sweet spot is when he can talk about, the press being the enemy of the people and attacking him, and the angry Democrats, and he can point to certain Democratic politicians who hate him, and that's his sweet spot. But I do think he should worry about the people in the middle, the Republicans who aren't loyal to him no matter what, the Republicans who want to see actual gains. And I think that's where it's so important that Republicans hold on to the Senate and maybe even pick up seats, because I think his biggest success so far has been these judicial confirmations, and not just the 2 Supreme Court confirmations, but filling the appeals court and down the list. If you pick up a couple more seats in the Senate, that's even more possible the next 2 years, no matter what happens in 2020. I think that's a win.
Let me just ask the panel quickly before heading back over there and resetting on 2020, because we've got some polling we want to show you on that.
Do we have to?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. We got election night coming in 3 weeks, and I think about 12 hours after that, we're going to have. I say we'll have 2020 start. We've already got declared. We've already got a declared 2020 candidate. There's a congressman from Maryland who said he's not running in 18 because he wants to run in 20. I don't know if he made the poll or not. I'm about to show. But where we are now is different than where we were 3 weeks ago, just in terms of where the numbers are for this. Do you think what we are looking at right now is more likely to be what lasts the rest of the way, or are we going to revert to where we were three weeks ago?
In terms of President Trump's popularity?
Yeah, and just the dynamics. 3 weeks ago, we were looking at Democrats, I think, on the offense in some of these Trump districts, even some of these Senate states. You were looking at an energy imbalance. The Republicans were, 10, 12 points behind the Democrats there. Do you think Kavanaugh fades and we're back there, or Trump steps in it on something and we're back there?
I mean, the news cycle for the last 2 years has been insane. This idea that we can even predict what will happen 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now is hard. The one thing that we do know is that Robert Mueller basically, in the special counsel's investigation, basically sort of was in this cooling period that in the last 60 days before an election, they try not to basically rock the boat if there is something to rock the boat about. What we do know is that after the election day, that becomes an issue again, so that may change things. But basically, the president has been running for re-election since the day after he was inaugurated. There have been social media campaigns that his campaign team has been running and spending a great deal of money on. That's just going to continue. So how much does President Trump get out there is the question, and do we see the same thing? It's polarizing, but it also raises the base up.
I think that's an interesting point, too. The sort of drip of Mueller news and incremental developments, that has slowed in the last couple of weeks. And I wonder, you look at a 3-point jump in his polling, if that has something to do with it. Well, everybody stick here for just a minute. I'm going to head back to the board and these much ballyhooed numbers about 2020. We're going to show you, because we did get a couple polls this week, or one poll, I should say, did take a look at this. Let me see if I can get this to work. There you go. Democratic race for 2020. They're saying this could be bigger in terms of the field than the Republican race in 2016. So the headline here, Joe Biden, the former vice president, is he going to run in 2020? He'd be 78 at the end of 2020. That would make him the oldest first-term president ever if he were to win. 33%. Joe Biden, first place when you take this poll. Second place, of course, Bernie Sanders got 7 million votes running against Hillary Clinton in 2016. He clocks in at 13%. Then you get Kamala Harris. Of course, Kamala Harris, very prominent lately with the Kavanaugh hearings, part of the Judiciary Committee. She's there, third place. Elizabeth Warren right behind her. She made some news this week. We'll talk about that in just a second. Cory Booker. How about it? Here's a blast from the past. John Kerry, the 2004 Democratic nominee. He's out there with a new book, the former Secretary of State. He's out there, and he said he's not ruling this out. Well, you put his name in the mix. He gets 5%. You got Michael Bloomberg. He's pouring money into the Democratic effort this year. He's re-registered as a Democrat, made a big deal about that this week. He seems interested. He seemed interested before. We'll see. I think he'd be, closing in the late 70s. 4%. Beto O'Rourke. Now, he's got that matter of a Senate race down in Texas that right now isn't looking that great for him. Does he even need to win that to run in 2020? Eric Holder, Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, Michael Avenatti. We were waiting for his name to get out of the mix. See what that did. 1%. Doesn't look like much. Then again, he's tied with Gillibrand, a senator, and Klobuchar, a senator. So those are the names they put out there for CNN. Of course, there are other names that could emerge. This looks like one of the largest, potentially most clunky, most fluid fields you've seen in the age of Trump, that thing that has held back a lot of potential presidential candidates before, where they go, wait a minute, maybe it's not my time, maybe it's better off waiting, maybe I'm in line behind somebody else. I think a lot of those rules are probably out the door as candidates look to the starting line for 2020. They figure, hey, if Trump could get there, I might as well give it a shot if I ever thought, I had any interest in it. On the Republican side, meanwhile, in this poll, they did ask a question to Republicans here. What about Trump in 2020? You're ready to sign up. Should the party renominate Trump, or should the party go fishing for another candidate? And you see the Republican base there. Probably not a surprise. 3/4 saying, hey, they're ready to renominate Trump. So, again, he got less than 50% when he won the nomination in 2016. If you added up all the primary votes, he got less than 50%. But by Election Day, he was doing better with the Republican base than Mitt Romney had done. And certainly during his presidency, he's really solidified the Republican base. So the avenue there for a Republican primary challenge doesn't seem that wide, at least right now. Panel is back with us. I'm curious, Aisha, I'll start with you. Name recognition is part of this. But Joe Biden, former vice president, third of Democrats right now. You put his name out there with all these others. Well, what do you make of that? Is that something that just disappears when the race starts and everybody else gets exposure, or is there a Biden constituency there?
I think that it's name recognition. I mean, he was our vice president, right? We all know and love Uncle Joe. I think that, though, anything can happen, right? We know that name recognition is everything. Beto O'Rourke is on fire in Texas right now, drawing crowds of like 20,000, 30,000
people.
people.
If he loses, can he run in 2020?
I absolutely believe that he could galvanize the hearts and minds of America if he got out on the road. Anything can happen. We're seeing Kamala Harris's numbers so high, obviously because of the work she's doing in the Senate, but she's also out there stumping for people. So she's getting out there and supporting lots of candidates until people are getting to know her personally. Same thing with Cory Booker. So I think that anything can change. These numbers are just so arbitrary right now. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that John Kerry guy, put him on a poll. You know, I don't think that that has anything to do, the numbers that we're seeing, with where the base is and who the base is really trying to lift up. What I predict, though, is I think that the Bernie Sanders contingent is going to start to fade more. I don't think that Bernie's going to be like top 3 when all is said and done.
You, as a Republican, taking a look at that list, who scares you there? Who do you look at and say, there's a candidate with some staying power potentially in the general election? Anybody?
I think, honestly, if Joe Biden had run in 2016, he would have crushed Donald Trump. And I think if he ran again, he'd have a good shot. But I do think, at the same time, as powerful as Biden is as someone on the left, he almost, I think, is fading into the background a little bit, despite his name recognition, because people, the base on the left, it seems to me, are so focused on what's our vision for the future? How are we going to change? You know, how are we going to shift the Democratic Party even further to the left? And I don't think that's something that Joe Biden really speaks to. He speaks to, I was, you know, vice president with Barack Obama. This is what the Democratic Party was. And unless he can kind of message in a sort of radical way to the kind of left-wing base, I don't know that he has that staying power. Someone like Kamala Harris, watching her in the hearings, I think a very effective politician, more so than Cory Booker, to my mind. I'm not too worried about Beto O'Rourke, honestly, especially if he doesn't win, but I haven't seen him in person, so I guess I'll reserve judgment on that.
The other name, as we say, making some news this week is Elizabeth Warren. Now, Elizabeth Warren is actually, she's running for re-election right now in Massachusetts. The polls have her pretty comfortably ahead there, and she seems to be looking at 2020. She released this DNA test. It shows she is, her blood, according to this test, is somewhere between, I think, what was it, 1/24th and 1,024th. Yes. And whether this test is even reliable, we don't know. So she put the test out there. She then, Trump had offered $1 million if she took this. She demanded her money from Donald Trump, and this was, we'll play this for you. This could be a preview of 2020, huh? Here's what Donald Trump had to say in response to that.
I see those candidates before my eyes every night before I go to sleep. Sometimes while I'm sleeping, I love them so much. Cory Booker, Pocahontas. I've got more Indian blood in me than Pocahontas, and I have none.
And that was actually Trump before she released this. He did have some comments yesterday. I'll give you a spoiler here. He wasn't ceding much to her after this yesterday. Shauna, let me ask you about what you make of Elizabeth Warren's decision to do this now. I know there's some grumbling from Democrats that, hey, could you have waited 3 weeks and a day to do this?
Yeah, I mean, number one, it really does telegraph that she's running for president of the United States if she's going to engage in this conversation about whether she has an ancestor who's Native American or not. The thing is, taking the DNA test is not going to stop President Trump from using the word Pocahontas to describe her. It's not going to stop the conversation. In some ways, it encourages him because now he knows he's getting a rise out of her. So I don't think as a tactic, I'm not so sure this worked very well. And I do think there are some Democrats who have a point that fight back. If you're going to run for president, you've got to figure out your message. Okay, we get that. But why would you do something that puts so much attention on you, 3 weeks before the election when your race is not the race people are worried about?
Does that resonate with you?
It does. It does. And I also think that if she thinks that she's going to beat Donald Trump by trying to get him to stop calling her names, then her strategy is completely, completely ineffectual, right? The other piece of it, though, is that I'm concerned. I mean, I think the world of Senator Warren. I think she's a fantastic lady. I think she's a wonderful politician, and she's a great policymaker. With that said, though, as a black woman, I'm feeling some type of way about her and this, needing to exploit this Native American heritage that she may or may not have without there being any narrative of a conversation about why this matters. Why did she in the 80s and 90s decide that she was going to call herself Native American? There could be an opportunity for Senator Warren to have a real conversation about identity, about ethnic politics, about family, about generations being lost, where she can actually say, you know, I did that because my ancestors, etc., you know, whatever she has to say, people in my family were dying. We're not really representative of like who we were. But that's not how she's bringing this conversation to the fore. And I get, you know, concerned that this is going to turn into a tone-deaf white woman running around trying to claim a little bit of colorful heritage as a way to appeal to some folks that's actually going to turn people off. So I just don't think that the strategy is smart if it's just about like, oh, Donald Trump's going to stop calling me Pocahontas, or at least that's going to be justified that I am Pocahontas. There's so much more there to it. And the last thing I'll say is, we don't even want to start asking questions about how this heritage came to be, because let's remember the history of our country, where relationships between Native Americans and colonizers were hardly, you know, the cleanest in the way that they were presented.
Yeah, so. Apparently, according to this, it was, I think, 6 to 10 generations ago. That's why the fractions are so distant and potentially far off. Quickly, though, Alexander, just on the Republican side of this poll, it did jump out at me. Just I remember adding up all the primary votes in 2016, and I think Trump's share was 46% of the vote back then. And I remember it kept climbing from the fall of 2015 really to Election Day 2016. At first, you know, Trump had a hold, people told me, on 15% of the Republican Party. It was this rump faction, and then it was like, maybe it's 25, and then it was 30 and 40, and then it was enough to get him the nomination, but it would never be enough to unite the party in the fall. And then, of course, he got the bulk of the Republican vote in the fall. This is unquestionably, that poll tells me, Donald Trump's party. That's
exactly the thought that I had. And I think that's how I felt looking at the Democratic, that poll that you just showed, you know, it's exactly the same thing that we saw in 2016 or 2015 from the Republican Party, and how maybe the base isn't going to rally around one person, and somebody who's kind of an outlier might be able to sort of capture the support on the left. I would find that pretty interesting. I myself was not a supporter of Donald Trump then, and really am not now. And I would have loved it if maybe 10 of those people would have dropped out in 2015, and we could have gotten a Marco Rubio or a Ted Cruz campaign even. So on the left, I wonder if something similar might play out in 2020.
But that appetite, just quick, that appetite for you didn't like him in 2016. It seems that a lot of the folks who felt that way have changed.
Shifted. And I think,
what is that?
I think a huge part of that is just seeing over the last few years how so much of the left has responded to Trump by sort of radicalizing further and moving even more to the left. And to me, that's why I think the Kavanaugh confirmation fight has such sticking power, because it wasn't specifically necessarily just about him, but it was about the way that a lot of conservatives and people on the right, myself included, who don't even really like Donald Trump necessarily, saw the other side as being willing to do anything possible to stop Trump and anything they can to stop conservatives.
But there's also, I mean, that poll about President Trump, and it was what, 74% think basically he should run again?
Right.
Well, yeah, he's the current president of the United States.
Right.
He has the bully pulpit.
It should be higher, honestly.
In some ways, it should be higher. He has the bully pulpit. Why, from a purely politics standpoint, why would you try to unseat your sitting president, who every time he goes on television, whether it's for a campaign event or for, you know, touring, you know, hurricane coverage, why would you unseat him?
Well, and that's the reason why people who I used to respect, right, respectable, smart, thoughtful Republicans, and the never-Trumpers who are like nowhere now, folks who I used to have respect for and now don't, are like clinging to Donald Trump, because let's be clear, Republicans want power. They will have a buffoon in the White House who they think that they can control, who can kind of destroy America, but then, like, you know, have some operatives in-house who, you know, stage this coup to say we're really actually going to keep them from destroying America, but all in the name of Republicans having power. And at the end of the day, like, you know, that's where we are. So they will allow Donald Trump to tweet. The good folks, right? The folks who never really liked him but want to be in power, they'll let him tweet. They'll let him do whatever, because it riles up a certain part of the base that helps them keep their jobs and helps them push through the radical agenda that they want to push through.
I guess this is a dated reference, but this is my cheap plug for my book that just came out called The Red and the Blue. You should get it. If you look back at 1992, George H.W. Bush was running for re-election that year, and he got a primary challenge, and it was because he had ticked off the right on a couple of, he raised taxes. That was a big one. He'd done a few other things. And Buchanan got almost 40% in the New Hampshire primary that year, and Bush's approval rating with Republicans was not that great. And it just strikes me that that's the point of reference, I guess, that I have in my mind. The next Republican president after that, George W. Bush, is running for re-election during a war, and there was a lot of unity that was kind of built into that. But H.W. was kind of my point of reference, where there was a lot of very vocal, on the surface, frustration with his presidency, ideologically and sort of directionally, and you saw it. And I look at the poll with Donald Trump, and I say, for all of the critiquing of Trump in the last few years, I take the point. It could be, yeah, I see it could be a higher number, and probably would have been in the past. But I guess it's when the point of reference is 15 and 16. And the lack of endorsements from anybody in the party to be at 75% essentially now, it's higher than in some ways than I would have thought.
Yeah, and I think that's a response, honestly, to the fact that there are all these constant side shows, and the White House seems to be kind of a clown show, honestly, most of the time. But at the end of the day, if you look at the list of policies that have gotten through, and also the judges that have gotten through, 2 Supreme Court justices now, I think that's what people are looking at. People on the right, you talk about wanting power. I think it's wanting Republican and conservative policies, and that's happened, even though, regardless of the drama that President Trump stirs up, for the most part, I think a lot of people on the right are happy with what's gotten done.
I think that's an interesting point. There's a lot more noise out in the air, I think, than we're used to. But would a President Rubio have done a lot of the same things? Maybe that's part of it. Shauna, Alexandra, Aisha, thank you all for joining me. Fun discussion today, and thank you at home for watching. We appreciate it, and we're going to see you right back here next week when we will be 14 days and counting from Election Day. We will see you then.